Hi, I'm Non from My Authentic Style, and this channel is dedicated to helping you find your authentic style. This video is a continuation of the Flamboyant Gamine body type and style profile breakdown that I just uploaded. If you haven't seen that video, the link will be in the description box, but this video serves as a focus on the hair and makeup for this body type. Flamboyant gamine hair should be asymmetrical, sculpted, or boyishly tousled, and the makeup should be fresh and vibrant. Hair should be asymmetrically sculpted or boyishly tousled. The outline is geometric, but the edges require some layering or beveling to add freshness and avoid severity. Because the flamboyant gamine is able to lean into the eclectic and original kind of look, they can opt for a very wild style if they so wish. Short hair works great because you need to show your face, particularly your eyes. Asymmetrical dips, sweeps, or side pieces are all extremely elegant for this type. So here I have all of these women showcasing what I think are all of these elements to various degrees. And in each of these looks, they all look stunning. Starting to the left with Tina Turner, she has that iconic big wild hair, and she's leaning into that original style, that wild hairstyle we just discussed. And you can see it doesn't overwhelm or overpower her in any way. It, in fact, creates a very iconic image that is synonymous with her. That is a type of hairstyle that would make a lot of people look very disheveled, homeless even, and yet this type is able to pull it off. But again, I will sound like a broken record here, but it's important to be aware of what essence a person has when choosing this style, because for all of these women who are flamboyant gamines, not all of them could carry that hairstyle. Penelope Cruz and or Audrey Hepburn, both pictured to the right, couldn't have any kind of hairstyle like Tina Turner because they have more of that classic essence, therefore requiring them to have more of a polished look. And in that wild sort of hairstyle, they would look crazy. Zoe Kravitz has the flamboyant gamine essence, but it doesn't carry out in the same way that Tina Turner does. So also for her, if she was to have that main sort of hairstyle, it just wouldn't work. Her features lean more towards the smallness and the sleekness of this type. So her hair also requires a smallness to it, which is why she looks amazing in a pixie cut. Or she can have very sleek and longer hair. I've seen her do that, and that could work too. But big, wild hair would be too far away from her composition that it would really clash with her, and she would look lost under hair as big as Tina Turner's. And then pictured next to Tina Turner is Tessa Thompson, and I particularly like this hairstyle because it is capturing that sculpted sort of style. It's a hairstyle that has a very specific geometry to it. It's rounded, but you can see that it stands upright. And it has that side element that stands on its own. It's very sleek and sculpted, very interesting in the shape, very unique. And I can't see it from the front, but even just from the side, that looks really, really great on her. To the right, Audrey Hepburn and Penelope Cruz have a very similar hairstyle. Those bangs, those very small, youthful bangs, which would look childish on other types, look infinitely sophisticated on them, very fresh, and they're small enough that their faces are visible and their eyes take center stage, which is important for this type, and they just suit them a great deal. Up top, Penelope has more of that long side sweep, so there's asymmetry there, and she also looks great in that hairstyle. Avoid blunt-edged symmetrical cuts. Avoid severe geometric shapes without an asymmetric edge of layered fringe to tussle. So here you have Penelope Cruz to the left and Tessa Thompson to the right. And in both cases, they have these very blunt fringe haircuts. And that bluntness in how that fringe is cut for Penelope Cruz, it just looks very flat and it takes something away from her. It's perhaps difficult to see when you compare it to that bottom right image where you see that asymmetry and the disarray of how those bangs fall. She looks so much more lively, so much more like herself, and it suits her far better than this. Likewise, Tessa Thompson. Tessa, interestingly, also has a face that carries a lot of visual weight. So she has a lot of softness in her face, and her best styles account for that. So they can be sculpted, like we saw in the previous page, and they can be sleek, but in that sleekness, there has to be an accommodation made for her additional softness. This particular hairstyle doesn't do that. It is very short. It cuts right at the top of her jawline, and it is very thin. So that thinness and that flatness against her face, it just makes her face look even puffier and bigger than it is because of that juxtaposition, which in this case is not doing her a positive. And then that color lacks contrast against her skin, which would be very useful. So there's almost simultaneously not enough going on with her hair and too much going on. And there's a complete lack of harmony. So this is to be avoided. Avoid ornate, teased, curly styles. So here we've discussed how amazing Zoe looks in a pixie haircut, and it's true. But this one doesn't suit her quite as well as the one we saw before. And it's because there's an additional ornateness to this. There's more roundedness and just a lot more styling. And it's very delicate on her. And she really has that chiseled face structure. So her face structure is almost opposite to Tessa's. She has a lot of that additional angularity and tautness and just sharpness. So the styles that work most harmoniously with her are those that help mirror that best. And this one doesn't do that. It gives her a lot more additional softness. Now, I will say she still looks amazing because she is stunning and it's really difficult for her to not look great. But comparing this to the other pixie that she had, you can sort of see that, okay, there is a break when it becomes a little bit too ornate and there's that additional length in the top. And it's just more delicate than I would choose for her. It's not terrible. It's still a pixie cut, which will always suit her, but not necessarily her best. Avoid wash and wear styles with no sculpture. So here we have Tessa Thompson in a hairstyle that looks to me like she just washed it and she went very naturalesque leaning, and she really requires that sort of sculpting and that more chiseled outline and a geometry to her hair. This doesn't have any of that. This lacks the necessary shaping and it's just there, and it really doesn't do much for her. There's no definition in any capacity. So even if she was keeping her curls, they lack definition. So none of it is really working for her, and she's lost behind her hair. Avoid long hair, except as described in the previous section, and avoid anything that hides your face. So here we have Penelope Cruz in this very long hair. And again, all of these people will always look beautiful, but there is something being taken away from her with this just very long hair that drags her down. The hair itself, the length feels very long and it's very tousled, so not giving any sign of geometry and sharpness. And I will say that Penelope, the way that I understand her essence, does have some of that romantic essence. So hair being tousled is not necessarily a terrible thing for her. She can definitely carry that off. But in this particular variation, there's too much of that and there's not enough stylization of her hair that gives it the appropriate shaping. So it just feels like it's covering her face. It really feels like she has a curtain of hair, and that doesn't work for her. And lastly, avoid overly soft styles. Here, soft means overly ornate, overly delicate. So anything that we would really push towards the romantic sort of styling will very often work against the sharpness and angularity and additional yang of this type. We have Zoe Kravitz at the bottom, and Penelope Cruz up top. And I think for both of them, these are not either of their best styles, but Penelope Cruz looks better because she does have, again, that little bit of a romantic essence. I still feel that her dominant essence is the classic type, but she does have a romantic essence as well. So she can carry off some of those elements, but in this hairstyle, it's all that. And it does feel very aging on her. She uses a lot of that vitality and that youth. And it's a hairstyle that just feels out of time. It's older than her, just not her best. In Zoe's case, it's completely separate from her. She has a lot more of that sharpness and that angularity, particularly in her facial features. And this is her when she was younger, so there's a bit more softness in her face. But even then, this is not what I would describe as her best styling. These curls and this rounded shape and the long bangs, it's just all very sweet, very delicate, and not particularly her best or her most harmonious styling. She looks, funny enough, very forgettable here. Whereas if you see pictures of Zoe Kravitz when she is playing into the sharpness and angularity of her gamine style, she is never forgettable. She is very striking. Her beauty is very striking. So for her to just look okay is really a testament to how much of her essence is lost when she doesn't lean into what suits her best, as we can see here. Hair color. Hair should be distinct and rich, not softened. If you decide to color your hair, choose a shade that is clear and vivid. If you are very daring, a theatrical color will work on you. Think of blue black, fiery red, or platinum, etc. Otherwise, stick very close to your original shade. If you need to cover gray or want to make the color a little richer, opt for overall color processes instead of subtle highlights. So the key takeaways here are bright, vivid, distinct colors that just stand out and are very dominant. There's a vibrancy that is attached to this essence, and that comes off in the way that you should choose to color your hair. Here we have, going from left to right, Tessa Thompson, very rich reddish color, and she can really wear a lot of different colors and look great, but this is one of them. She can have jet black hair and look great, but the color itself is solid and rich and vibrant, which is what I'm pointing out. To her right, both Penelope Cruz and Zoe Kravitz have that sharp, dark color, and I think Penelope Cruz's hair has a little bit of highlighting, but it's so subtle that there's a distinct darkness to it. It looks like, oh, she has black hair, and that's what you want to go for. Zoe Kravitz's hair, to me, looks like it is dyed jet black, so very distinct, and she looks great in it. She also has that sharpness in her bangs. They look like they would just cut across her forehead, and that is so beautiful. So they're short, and they have that smallness to account for the smallness of this type, but there's also that angularity and sharpness and precision. She just looks wonderful in that hairstyle, and it's also sleek and pulled back, so just stunning. Her jawline, her cheekbones, her bone structure is really emphasized, and she looks amazing. And then to the right of that, Kelly Osbourne has that beautiful, bright, vivid purple color that she had as a signature of hers for a very long time. And notice how it's all one solid purple. I think there's purple black going on, but the purple is very vivid and distinct. And I also love the cut of that hair. It is short and it has that angularity to it. So it's not blunt across, it's kind of angled at her jawline going up. So that sharpness is wonderful. And then it has that bluntness across her forehead, which works for her. So I know we discussed how that sort of blunt cut wouldn't work or didn't work for Tessa Thompson and Penelope Cruz, but it does work here for Kelly Osbourne. I also think that the bangs themselves are quite small, so they have a shortness to them, which the size is important. But just a note to say that different things will work on different people because different people have different essences and they play out differently on our faces. But the key here is that color is stunning. I know this is probably a reworked image, but I do think Kelly Osbourne is rather pale. So there's that contrast in color between her skin and the color of her hair. And just that adds that shock of vibrancy too, which makes it fun and really dynamic on her. Avoid trying to soften the hair with subtle highlights or lightening the overall effect. So, in all of these cases, I think it's pretty clear that these hair colors are not these women's best. Starting with Zoe Kravitz, in both these images, the first and the second one, this very blonde color, it feels too warm for her. So it's very light, but it's very yellowy. And because of that, it sort of feels like it doesn't cut through her skin tone to have enough of a contrast and that vibrant feel. So it just looks like she was stripped of color somehow, and it looks very offish. I have seen her in acid white or platinum blonde hair, and she can pull that off. I still don't think it's particularly her best look, but when she goes ultra white, there is that contrast more so than this, and that looks better. But here, just this lightening of her hair color really doesn't do much for her. And then Penelope Cruz here, this softening of her dark hair color as well, these very broad sort of highlights are rather aging on her. And if we compare her to when her hair is very dark and she has that solidity of color, you can see that that contrast, that vibrancy suits her so much better. And Tessa Thompson, for her, this lightening of her hair is not necessarily aging, but it is very bleh, for lack of a better word. It just doesn't do much for her. She sort of blends into it. And like Zoe Kravitz in a few slides ago, I said she becomes forgettable. So here I just feel like this is a pretty girl, but I don't necessarily feel like, oh yeah, that's Tessa Thompson. So there's something lost in this lack of vibrant, clear coloring. And then this was an interesting image I found of Tessa where she has this very fun but blotchy coloring. And I thought it was worth discussing because this is a type that we typically want to say, do all the crazy things, go for it, you can do anything. And that typically is too, especially for somebody like Tessa, who I believe is not only a gamine type, but she also has that essence. So doing this crazy thing is definitely up her alley. However, I don't think that this look works, and there's a couple of things just working against it. I think if she was simply playing with color and having wacky colors on her head, there's definitely a way for her to do that and pull it off. Here, however, one, the hair lacks definition, and this is a type that is really requiring that framing and asymmetry, especially for her. So if she had a clear shape of her hair, it can be in its natural curl style, but this is just sort of roundedly framing her face. There's a little bit of asymmetry, sure, but it's still very not sharp and angular. If it had a crazy sort of angular cut and then it was colored a vivid whatever color she would choose, and then the rest of the outfit worked to support that look, it would work. But the hair itself lacks that definition, and then the coloring of the hair lacks that definition. It's very soft in how these colors are used. There's like orange here and orange up top, and it blends into the purple, and then which is picked up by her lip. So it's not sharp enough. It's almost this watercolor blend, which doesn't work for this type. And I would need it to be a lot more distinct, not only in the style, but also in the coloring, and to feel a lot sharper, and then it would work for her. But as is, this is not really doing much for her. I wanted to discuss Tina Turner for a little bit because I think she does buck the trend here. Kibbe tells us to avoid trying to soften the hair with subtle highlights or lightening the overall effect. And I think that Tina Turner's signature hairstyle is in effect a softened mane. It has those dark roots and then goes into that blonde with variations of highlighting in it. So very light blonde to darker blonde, honey blonde, and you can see there's a spectrum there that she's held over time. But it does have that softening of color that this type is supposed to stay away from. But she does it really well, and it just works for her. And in fact, I would say she looks great in all of these hairstyles and all of these variations of color. But when she moves towards a more distinct color like we see here. To be fair, this is a picture taken much later on when she is much older, but stay with me. When she moves towards this is still a color that has highlights, but it's more solid than what we've seen previously. So it's very chestnutty brown with a little bit of blonde highlights that I can see, but it just feels very closer to being monotone than these other images. And I would argue that this is her least flattering hair color. It's so close to her skin tone that she almost disappears, and the look that she has is one where her hair is so distinct that there's a clear separation between herself and it, but that works beautifully together. And now compare her again. This is her at a similar age to the image right on top that we looked at. But at the bottom, she has more of the same coloring as these images to the left. So there's more of that contrast and that softening of that dark color. And she looks amazing in that. So she really requires that variation in colors to look her best. And when there isn't that, and her color gets close to being one solid color, vibrant or not, she really loses something. So, just something interesting that helps us to remember that these rules apply to an extent, and you have to figure out what to intake because how it plays out on you might be very different to the next person. It likely will be. And now let's talk flamboyant gamine makeup. Makeup is your finishing touch, providing the elegance and sophistication that your image identity requires to be completely coordinated head to toe. A smoky face, which combines deep, sultry colors with a touch of vibrancy around your eyes. Strong cheeks and a deep lip color is your best look. Don't choose shades that are overly bright, just a hint of color is necessary to bring out your flamboyant spirit. Stick to matte colors for the day with the simple addition of sheer sparkle, most effective at night. So, the takeaway here is that the gamine essence has a youthful quality to it. And as it translates to makeup, there's a particular freshness that needs to be maintained for this type to look its best. When your makeup starts to feel too heavy, it really drags you down. And the emphasis of the eyes for this type 2 is a particular touch point. So, emphasizing that brightness and that bigness of those eyes, if that is how your composition plays out, like in the case of Audrey Hepburn, her eyes are such a big part of her feature, as with Twiggy to the right, and she really played them up there, as was the style in that era. But that is something that this type can translate to their makeup today because, again, it's emphasis on the eyes, but a freshness in the face and just a little bit of light color to the lips. That's a perfect look. And Audrey Hepburn has something similar with a strong emphasis on her eyebrows as well, which is such a key feature for her. But eyebrows shape the eyes, so it's still emphasis on that eye area and clear, beautiful skin and a little bit of color to the lips. Simple, visible there, and just capturing that youth and that vitality without being too crazy. Zoe Kravitz has something similar there, but she also has that intensity to her, so she can really play up a more vibrant lip. She often wears a very bright red lip, and that looks great on her. And to the left of that, Tessa Thompson, a little bit more sultry, her makeup, but again, very beautiful because she has additional softness that comes in her face. So when she leans into that with her makeup, it looks very natural and very harmonious on her. Avoid pastel colors as they are too matronly on you. So pastel colors will be rather aging on this type, and I think this is a case here with Penelope Cruz. When I look at her face here, I am drawn to her lip color, which feels very separate to the rest of her face. And again, what colors work and don't work is going to depend on the person's color composition, but pastel colors generally will be aging on this type. In this case, for Penelope Cruz, it holds that pastel colors are aging. Avoid watercolor blended edges. These are too aging on you. So I find this very interesting, and we will discuss Tessa in a little bit some more because her makeup here is very soft and delicate, and because she has a lot of softness and delicacy to her, it does work for her. But in general, this is a sort of blended watercolor look that would be overly soft and delicate for this type and would just look quite separate from them. So if you can imagine this makeup on Penelope Cruz or Zoe Kravitz, for example, you see what I mean. But it does interestingly work on Tessa Thompson because she does carry that additional softness. But in general, avoid watercolor blended edges, as well as overly ornate or glittery makeup. Avoid only neutrals as this is too stark on you. So this makeup style leans into that no makeup trend, which especially for Zoe on the right, it almost really does look like she's not wearing makeup. But you can see the shaping of her eyebrows and the eyeliner on her top lid. So I think she does have some makeup going on, but it's very minimal. And it has the effect of making her just look rather unwell, and it could be how this picture is taken, but something definitely is taken away. I do want to see a little bit of makeup on her. I want to see a lip color, even if it's subtle. I want to see something. I think that suits her best, and this very sort of plain nothing there look is a bit stark on her. To the left of that, I can definitely see that Tessa Thompson has makeup on, but it's again very, very subtle and very neutral. The colors all blend together to where there isn't much of a palette going on her face, and she is much better suited by the makeup to the left, where that vibrant lip is there, and even her eye makeup is as wild as it is. But that is better on her than this look to the right, where it's just very, very subtle and it looks a bit forgettable yet again. And then I would add to avoid overly intense makeup. So here we have to be careful because again, this is going to look different on different people because of their essences. But I generally believe that because of the youthful essence of this type, there is a particular subtlety that they do require, and makeup that falls into that overly intense category cancels that out and it just is overpowering on them. In Zoe Kravitz's case, she does have a very chiseled face that carries a sort of intensity, so she can lean into that more so than probably most. But even for her, these two looks with her eyes in that very dark eyeliner look, it's too intense even for her. There's a separation between that eye makeup and the rest of her face. This is something fun that she can lean into and absolutely something gorgeous for her to do for editorial pieces. That would look amazing, but just in general, not an everyday look. And it's too intense. This is where we see the separation between the flamboyant gamine and the dramatic, for example, because sometimes you can think of the flamboyant gamine as a smaller and more fun dramatic. But here, this is a makeup look that requires the full intensity of a dramatic type to carry it off. And you can see where the flamboyant gamine falls short. It's too intense, too heavy for this type. Penelope Cruz, her makeup is a lot more subtle as compared to what we just saw in both images of Zoe Kravitz, but that eye makeup is again even more subtle as it is too intense for her. It's just a bit too much. She really has that delicacy to her face, so we want something a lot more subtle than that. And Tessa, while she can handle, I believe, a lot more intensity than, say, Penelope Cruz, even for her, that eye makeup is just too jarring and too intense. Again, fun for editorial. I think she can do a lot, but she, because of that additional softness in her face, really wants to lean more in that softer and romantic style as opposed to more dramatic. This is very separate from her. And speaking of Tessa, this is where I wanted to discuss that softness in her face. So Kibbe says to avoid pastel colors as they are too maturely on this type, watercolor blended edges because they are too aging for this type, and overly ornate or glittery makeup because it is too unsophisticated for this type. But for someone like Tessa Thompson, who is, I truly believe, a flamboyant gamine, and I know somebody's going to want to argue that she's a soft gamine because of the softness on her face. And we will get into doing celebrity breakdowns, and I look forward to it once I complete all these types. But in any case, I believe her to be a flamboyant gamine who just happens to carry this additional softness, particularly on her face. And for the sake of this portion of this video, you're gonna have to take me at my word. So for her, this is one of her least flattering looks because that softness shows up on her face, and as such, it needs to be accommodated. And this sort of very sleek hairstyle that pulls all of it away from her face doesn't do her any favors. If anything, it actually stretches out her face and makes it look even wider and puffier than it is, and is not flattering at all. This hair color is something we've seen previously, but she had it down and cascading and it looked beautiful on her. But now that it's all pulled back, you even question if it looks good on her because there's just this lack of contrast. You don't even see it. And then the lip has this intensity in the color, which she typically can pull off, but the way that all of these colors are playing up against each other, the look just doesn't work. But in this look, you could argue that she is doing none of the things that Kibbe is saying she shouldn't do. So she isn't wearing a pastel color. The one color we see on her lip is very intense and bold. She does not have any watercolor blended edges. Her eye makeup is blended a little bit, but it's not what I would consider overly watercolor and pastel-y and overly soft. It's just a little bit of emphasis on the eyes. And she also doesn't have overly ornate or a glittery face. So she's not doing any of the things Kibbe tells gamines to avoid, but this makeup falls completely flat on her as well as the hair. This is just not one of her best beauty looks. And then to the right, she is doing all of these things. So that first one has her in that pastel makeup in her eye area, and also pastel and water blended all over the side of her face and her eye area. She also has sparkly, glittery face in that first and the image to the right, and just very soft and blended. And then in the middle, that blue eyeshadow is pastel and very softly blended. So in these three images to the right, she is literally doing all of the things that flamboyant gamines are not supposed to do. And she looks amazing. That's where she comes to life, because those are the makeup styles and techniques that lean into her softness and her delicacy, and she looks absolutely beautiful when she does that. So just a final plea for making sure that you understand your particular blend of essences, because that'll help you to know which rules to ignore and which to follow, so that your style and your hair and your makeup can really come together to create your most authentic and beautiful style. And with that, I would love to know if you are a flamboyant gamine and if you agree with my hair and makeup assessment. Do let me know in the comments. As mentioned in the previous video, I will also link the free flamboyant gamine sample wardrobe in the description box of this video. Keep in mind, it's more than just all the wardrobe items that I've discussed in the previous video for this type, which if you haven't seen, link is in the description box. But it's all of those items, all the accessories, as well as a breakdown for the hair and makeup of this type. So just a truly useful document that I think anybody who is a flamboyant gamine or who suspects that they might be would benefit from having in one place. If you're interested in getting that, the link will be in the description box, and I hope it is very helpful to you. Thank you so much for watching till the end. If you like the content that I'm creating, or if you want to discuss anything I touched on in the video, please do so. Leave me a comment. Also, like the video and of course, subscribe and turn on those notifications. I'll see you on the next one.